YouTube, it's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, we have some very, very interesting news, and to a lot of people, it can be disheartening. Okay, it can be disappointing. But let's just listen to what Tim Smith of the PBC Premier Boxing Champions had to say regarding the mega super fight between undefeated three-division world champion, former undisputed junior welterweight world champion, currently the reigning WBO welterweight world champion, who is widely considered by many to be the number one best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, in Terence Bud Crawford. 38 wins, no losses, no draws, 29 big wins by way of knockout, 34 years of age, stands at 5'8" with a 74-inch arm reach, and undefeated unified WBC IBF welterweight world champion superstar boxer who is widely considered by many to be top 3 best pound-for-pound fighters in the world, and Errol the True Spence Jr., who is 27 wins, no losses, no draws, 21 wins by way of knockout, 31 years of age, 5'9.5" with a 72-inch arm reach. Errol Spence is expected to go into a unification showdown against Cuban star boxer who's currently the WBA World Boxing Association's reigning welterweight super champion, Yordenis Ugas, in April. And Terence Bud Crawford is coming off the biggest victory of his career against two-time welterweight world champion superstar boxer Showtime Shawn Porter, who is now retired. But with that said, that fight took place November 20th, and the fight that the world want to see is Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. And these comments made by Tim Smith is going to make it seem, or is going to be, that Errol Spence is avoiding the fight with Terence Crawford. It depends how you look at it. Glass half full, glass half empty. Tim Smith is saying there's no money to pay Terence Crawford. But at the same time, he's saying that Terence Crawford is asking for big money, but Terence Crawford hasn't been promoted properly as a pay-per-view star. And so that's going to hinder the fight between Errol Spence and Terence Crawford because there's simply no money to pay Terence Crawford the money that Terence Crawford is looking for. And they don't want to insult Terence Crawford's intelligence by offering him a lowball number. And that the fans are simply not going to pay for Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence, which I completely disagree. But I'll give my thoughts after you listen to what Tim Smith had to say. Listen.
A pay-per-view star. And I'm not saying that.
So he started off by saying Terence Crawford is not a pay-per-view star and he hasn't been moved and promoted correctly to be a pay-per-view star. But listen.
To throw shade at the guy, but you got to go on his track record. You got to go and look at what he's done, in the pay-per-view fights that he's been at, been involved in. And, that it's not my job.
So he's referring to what I always say when Errol Spence is asking for a 60-40 split in his favor. And Errol Spence says, I'm the big fish and I'm the bigger brand and I'm the biggest star. The numbers don't lie. The proof is in the pudding. And Errol Spence, he lets it be known that I've done 350,000 pay-per-view buys with Mikey Garcia. I did 325,000 pay-per-view buys with Shawn Porter. I did 315,000 pay-per-view buys with Danny Swift Garcia. Back to back to back. With Terence Crawford, his first pay-per-view was against Victor Posto. He did 60,000 pay-per-views. His second pay-per-view was with Amir Khan. He did 150,000 pay-per-views. And his third fight was with Showtime Shawn Porter, a mutual opponent, and it did 190,000. But some people say it did 150,000. So combined, Terence Crawford did about 410,000 pay-per-views. You factor in the 210 with the 190, that's about 400,000 pay-per-view buys. Okay, Errol Spence, you factor in 350 plus 325, that's 775. And then you add in another 300, which is well over 1 million pay-per-views, okay? So with that said, Errol Spence is the bigger brand. So Tim Smith is saying that, it's not Terence Crawford's fault. It's not to knock Terence Crawford, but he simply hasn't been moved correctly, and he's not a pay-per-view star. So listen to what he said. He didn't want to insult him.
To tell anybody how to make him a pay-per-view star. We have enough work on our hands dealing with, trying to make our own guys into pay-per-view stars, but he just hasn't been built. And trust me, if there is money in him fighting Errol.
So see, he says Terrence Crawford just hasn't been built as a pay-per-view star, and we have, we got enough on our hands building our own pay-per-view stars to tell him how to be a built as a pay-per-view star. But here's where I disagree. Listen to what Tim Smith is getting ready to say. This is what I disagree when he says that if there was money in the fight for Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford, then we would have made the fight.
Spence, where he could get what he wants, and Errol could get what he wants, that fight would get made. But you don't want to insult the guy. Nobody wants to insult this guy and make him an offer that's insulting. No.
So he's saying that if there was money, in an Errol Spence Terrence Crawford fight, which I believe there is, this fight would be made already. So now it's looking like the PBC, Premier Boxing Champions, are not looking to make this fight with Terrence Crawford because they don't see a value in the fight between Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford, which in my opinion is completely incorrect because I believe the fans will show up and show out for Terrence Crawford Errol Spence fight. And now he's going to say that, the fans are not going to buy the fight with Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford. So listen what he has to say.
Nobody wants to do that. Like I said, he's a proud champion, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that to him. But from a business standpoint, it's a fight that, might excite the fans.
So he says from a business standpoint, it's a fight that might excite the fans. No, Tim. And I like Tim. Tim Smith is a very good guy. Tim Smith, he states that it's a fight that might incite the fans. It might excite the fans. No, there's no might. This is a fight that the fans in the boxing world has been clamoring for. It will excite the fans. The fans will show up and show out for Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence. And Terrence Crawford is now a network promotional free agent. They don't have to share the pie with top-ranked legendary promoter, top-ranked CEO and promoter Bob Arum and ESPN. It's not a joint network. Terrence Crawford is a network promotional free agent. So this should be able to get done.
And all these people that are out there yelling about pay-per-view and too much they're not buying it anyway. They're not going to plop down any money to make it, successful. They're going to steal the fight.
So you see, he says they're not going to buy the pay-per-view. They're going to essentially stream it. All of the fans that are screaming for Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence fight are not going to support the fight. They're going to stream it. I disagree. I think that the fans, Errol Spence has shown that he can do, if you factor in, you put in the fact that Errol Spence is doing $350,000 with Mikey Garcia. Okay, this is much more highly anticipated fight. Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence. If Terrence Crawford could do $200,000 and Errol Spence can account for $325,000 because Errol Spence versus Sean Porter did $325,000. So you say that most people say Mikey Garcia sold the fight with Errol Spence and Mikey Garcia, so it only did $350,000. So $325,000 means that Mikey Garcia only accounted for $25,000. So you factor in $200,000 from Terrence Crawford, okay, and you factor in $325,000 from Errol Spence. Well, now you're talking about $550,000, $500,000 of pay-per-views. For today's climate, that's a big number. 500,000 pay-per-views plus 500,000+ pay-per-views is a huge number. And I think it would do more than 500. I think that the fact that the anticipation and the fact that you'll see two undefeated superstars in the ring for who's the best pound for pound fighter in the world, they're both undefeated. Nobody has a loss. That in itself, the intrigue would sell 100,000. Okay, so I think it would do at least 600,000. But let's listen to what he had to say.
But, they're not going to support it on pay-per-view, and the numbers, won't be enough to give him what he needs. Yeah.
So he said the numbers won't be enough to give him what he needs. But the fans, if you promote it correctly, the live gate for Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford, and again, like I said, 600,000 for both guys, when you put them together, at the very least, will sell. I believe that will be enough to be able to fit the bill for Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford, unless everybody's looking to drastically heighten what they're looking for. Let's listen.
Or not necessarily what he needs, but what he wants.
So he says is what Terrence Crawford is going to want, but then in the same token, he's going to say he don't know the number he wants. I find that hard to believe. I think he knows the ballpark figure of what Terence Crawford is looking for to make this fight happen. And Errol Spence is going to fight Yordenis Ugas in a unification bout. Errol Spence wins that fight. The fans are going to call for Errol Spence versus Terence Bud Crawford, and they're not going to accept anything else.
And I don't know what that number is, but I would think that number, would be very high.
So he says that he expects Terence Crawford's number to be very high, as it should be. Okay, so we can't make the biggest fights in the sport of boxing because we are relying on pay-per-view. So if there's no pay-per-view, there's no big fights. So we'll make the lower tier fights, lackluster fights, we'll put on because there's not enough fans supporting the pay-per-view. When we had major fights on free TV, but the fans, is it that the boxers are expecting too much money? They expecting Floyd Mayweather money with this pay-per-views, or the promoters and the networks expecting Floyd Mayweather type of comebacks, a return on their investments? That's not realistic.
I'm not involved in those talks, but that's just looking at the sport historically. I just don't.
Well, looking at the sport historically, we had major fights on free TV, okay? And we had Manny Pacquiao, who was looking for $30 million, to fight Adrian Broner, and he was paid such, $25 to $30 million. Manny Pacquiao got a hefty $25 million to fight Yordenis Ugas, okay? Canelo Alvarez just reportedly received $40 million from PBC to fight Caleb Plant for $10 million. So that's $50 million. If you could come up with $50 million for Canelo Alvarez and Caleb Plant, because you're hoping that the numbers come back and do well, okay? Canelo Alvarez and Caleb Plant didn't do 1 million pay-per-view buys. It reportedly did 700,000, okay? 700 to 750,000 pay-per-views. Well, that's not far off from 600,000 that is, at the very least, I expect Terence Crawford and Errol Spence to do, okay? And Terence Crawford and Errol Spence are not asking for $40 million, one fighter, okay? You could get a fight between Terence Crawford, I'm sure, in the ballpark of $30 million total, 15 and 15. That's still less than the purse that you paid Canelo Alvarez, $40 million himself. And that you're saying that you take away the $10 million, the $20 million off the table that you had to give Caleb Plant and you had to give Canelo Alvarez, the extra $10 million, that makes up for the 150,000 less pay-per-view buys. Let's listen.
And I don't think he should be insulted. I really don't.
So he said you don't feel like Terence Crawford should be insulted with a lowball number. I don't believe so either. I believe that they should come up with a way to find, if you paid Canelo Alvarez $40 million, and we know that Caleb Plant got $10 million, okay? That's $50 million. And it only did 750,000 pay-per-views. Well, again, you factor in the fact that Errol Spence did the highest gate. Errol Spence gate in 2020 did a bigger number. His fight with Danny Garcia at Dallas Cowboys Stadium did a bigger number than Canelo Alvarez. So that means that Errol Spence is a big draw in person, at the very least, okay? So that means that Errol Spence is going to do at least 300,000 pay-per-views. And Terence Crawford, the fact that this fight is anticipated, he can factor in 200,000 pay-per-views, 190, okay? And then the intrigue and the interest and the anticipation for this fight is going to put in another 100,000 for this fight, okay? So with that said, I believe that if you could come up with the number for Canelo Alvarez that only did 750,000 pay-per-views, you can come up with the number of $15 million, I'm sure, $15 million number, to be able to pay Errol Spence and Terence Crawford, $15,000 apiece, right? Unless they're looking to receive a higher number than that, well, then you can expect. So they said that it topped out at 800,000, close to 800,000, Canelo Alvarez, Caleb Plant. Well, you can expect, and that fight with Caleb Plant and Canelo Alvarez wasn't as anticipated as Terence Crawford and Errol Spence, which is the biggest fight in the sport of boxing. So 15 million should be more than enough to get this fight done. And that money should be available to pay these two fighters in a massive showdown. And the live gate for Errol Spence broke it. It did higher than Canelo Alvarez, so that means he's definitely a draw. And you put the right opponent in there, Terence Crawford, it exceeds that. So let's see how this unfolds and plays out. But make sure you hit the like button. Drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue, Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. You haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the bell icon to get all the new notifications. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shout out to the entire LDBC. Shout out to New Media. Shout out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like and share these videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.